Everyone, this is Dr. Katherine Kelly, and I am back today on book launch day. Very excited. Things are going really well. We have hit 6 categories on the Kindle edition for #1 new release. We've hit 2 so far today on the soft cover. So I am, and I'm going to start crying. I'm an ugly crier, but I'm very touched. This has gone so well, and it just proves how much we need to help healthcare workers right now. So it's very exciting, and I will probably cry through this at times. I was just talking to Carol, who I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes. I was just talking to her about how intense some of the interviews have been with healthcare workers for this book, and how some of my clients have shared some pretty beautiful but very difficult stories. And I think in the last 5 days, I've probably teared up and cried more about getting this book out there to everybody than I ever thought I would, because it's such a powerful time. And so just a quick recap. Again, this is launch day for the Healer's Path to post-COVID recovery. This is what you will get if you order a soft copy today. And I'm going to tell you a little bit at the end of this video how to get your bonus prizes for if you do order today, which is 2/22/22. It's again, it's the Healer's Path to Post-COVID Recovery, a restorative journey for healthcare providers. But I have to say, it's been quite a journey for me. For those of you who don't know this already, I interviewed almost 150 traditional and non-traditional, meaning holistic practitioners for this book. And beautiful, incredible, powerful, deep, painful stories. But at the same time, my intention was to give people a path to recover. As I've said before, healthcare providers have a procedure for everything but themselves. They don't know what's hit them, and most of them don't know how to take care of themselves. So this is really why I created this book, and why it is such a passion for me to get this out to the world. Now, the purpose of this particular video, and I guess I'll call it an interview, I want to call it a conversation, is that about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I came in contact with Carol Francis, and she's going to talk to you about herself in just a moment. She is also a psychologist, healthcare worker in California. I'm going to let her kind of explain all that, but she also creates and paints portraits of healthcare providers in their masks. And that was just so beautiful and touching to me when I found that out. And it was another author who actually suggested I contact Carol. And so it's been beautiful since, because we're creating this interesting healing the healer kind of bond. We're trying to pair up and help the healers as best we can. And we're going to hopefully add some other healthcare providers to that who are trying to help healers as well. But I wanted to bring her on today to show that it's going to take a lot of work to get healthcare providers back where they need to be and beyond where they were. But we have lots of different options out there. So I just wanted to, again, bring Carol on and have her introduce herself in just a minute and kind of tell you what it is that she does, how she can fill in the other parts of the picture, and how we are hopefully going to work together to do our very best at helping healthcare workers. So I'm going to turn this to you for a few minutes, Carol, and just let you introduce yourself. And as we talked, we're going to keep this very conversational. We're going to ask each other the questions that we're curious about with each other's work. But I'm going to hand it over to you for a few moments.
And Katherine, I greatly appreciate your work, and I appreciate that you've been bold enough or kind enough to include me in this particular thing. Now, I don't know if I'm on screen or not. I'm certainly not on screen for myself. So I'm going to just talk to you and everybody else that's tuned in. And if you'll bear with me, everybody, I first want to tell you what it is I offer, because it's what I offer, and it's all free for healthcare workers, their families as well. And that's just the way I've been approaching it since 2020, since December 26, 2020. Recovery after trauma work for healthcare workers is, how do I do that?
Yeah, Zoom gets a little tricky when you're trying to show.
There we go.
There we go.
I guess it's the same book that's in the background here. So that is a book that's just it's Find Your Path here. There's hundreds and hundreds of tools to help people stay on the path of recovery, and choose your tools. If you find 5 tools that work for you on a regular basis, and then maybe you have to kind of change them as you evolve, then so do it. Your path, anybody's path for recovery is going to be a unique process. Their unique evolution, as you talk about in your book. And that is the purpose, is to say, here are the tools, choose the ones that work for you as you go along. You make reference in your book to the Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, and what beautiful stories both of those are, because it's about a very bizarre set of journeys that start off fairly traumatically and completely surprisingly, and people lose their identity. But what's fun about those fantasy books is that they're fantasy and we can just lose ourselves in the fantasy. But what's so different is that this healthcare stuff is not fantasy. So very quickly, within a few months of us all being on quarantine, I got the book out. I started sending it to all the healthcare workers I could. A friend of mine was making PPE masks because we just didn't have enough out here. Another friend of mine could ship them from China. So every shipment that we got to clinics and hospitals, along came the book. Because it was just pathetic that they were not protected or covered. And so we wanted to make sure they had the practicalities of it, and they also had the emotional support too. So this book has been out ever since that March 13th time in California, and a whole lot earlier on the East Coast. So what a horrific time. Katherine, yet I have to say, this is not the first time horrific things happen in the human race.
No.
And so this is our era. This is one of our eras. We've had others. Perhaps we're going to enter into a new one with Ukraine and Russia. There are eras. Every generation or every 100 years, there's a major plague. And then there are minor plagues in between. There are wars. There's natural disasters. And then there's the individual abuse and trauma that people go through, because human beings are just not evolved enough to always be kind to each other. So I've been doing trauma work with people since I entered into the profession, which was 45 years ago. So old. And that started off with Vietnam soldiers. And remember how they were greeted. And they didn't get the benefit of feeling like they were honored heroes. And now I understand healthcare workers don't want to have the burden of being heroes, but they do need to be honored. And they need to be honored in a way that doesn't burden them. So my scrambling over the last couple of years, how do I honor them? How do I see them? How do I help them? Because I was under quarantine because I suffered COVID very quickly in the process and had long haulers. So it was how do I help them from where I'm not in the inner circle? How do I do that? So another way I did that was through a website called Health. You see that little phone right there on the background. Yes. So healthworkersupport.com is an online support. And what you do is you can go to a class that matches what your need is about family or schedule, or about panic, anxiety, about dealing with death, about trying to find your own place of bliss when nothing's blissful around you, et cetera, et cetera. And you can just tap into 10-minute class. And then these audios that are all about self-hypnosis, very soothing, guided imagery, and they're very healing. And so a person can, and that's offered free as well. Hundreds of courses and classes and videos and information. The person just tap in whenever they have a moment. They get into their car after a horrible shift. They can either pick up the book or they can listen to the audio or the video and just recalibrate themselves into the next phase of their life. And people that walk into their car and have to face a grueling day, they don't want to go to work. How do you shift yourself into wanting to do it when you are compassion fatigued, burned out, secondary traumatic stress oriented? So these are tools. And my thought was all about offering tools after tools after tools. And then the final tool, I just really want to kind of filibuster, and I will turn it over back to you. I'm sorry about that. These are healthcare portraits that I did early on. And I'm going to bend over so you can see some of them. I've done now about 215 of them. They used to take 30 hours, and I figured out a way to do it. So it was a little bit faster. Now they're about 15 hours a piece. And I get these photos of these incredible people and their stories. And then I turn them, I paint them from their photos, and I often get to hear where they're coming from. These people are they're scary, amazing. And so I know that they don't want to necessarily feel like they're heroes, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
With all the hundreds of millions of people all over the world that have suffered from COVID, and then you think about each of those individuals probably had no less than 5 healthcare workers assisting them through it, either assisting them through to death or assisting them back to health. I myself have had that as well. These are, and some of the people that I painted are my own healthcare workers, not on this screen, but they show up, and they show up because it's their work, their job, but they show up because they also have so much to offer, and they show up because they have passion, they have compassion, and they have passion, but they also are as vulnerable and breakable as any of us are.
Right.
And those individuals that have gotten the COVID and then had to suffer through that and then get back on their feet, their stories are, vastly different than those that have never gotten it. Like, I don't know why, I've been exposed every day, but I've never gotten it. Their stories are different too. But when you talk to them about the death and the grief, oof. But then you also talk about the teamwork. And this is where I want to go back to the soldiers. When I was working with the Vietnam soldiers and have worked with soldiers since that time, one of the things I discovered is that when they had a strong sense of camaraderie with other individuals that had suffered or endured what they went through, they were very traumatized, but they also didn't feel alone. They were extremely upset about the deaths they saw and soldiers even caused, but they had soldiers that could get it. And it's that connection on the inner circle that becomes so incredibly important. And then you talk about in your book about shame and embarrassment, about admitting that I need, and how healthcare workers have that. It's a hard time for them to even admit that to each other, much less to themselves. So a portion of my book and a portion of your book are dedicated to, admit it to yourself, so that we can move on and you can experience these wonderful tools that are set up to help you recover every day, because I think recovery is a daily process, a daily exercise. Renewal is a daily exercise. And then to also regroup. But finally, I keep saying finally. Oh, Catherine, I just talked
It's never finally in this situation.
but finally, I have to say that when an individual kind of says, I really do need to recover, the state of vulnerability that they're in, and honesty and sincerity, and you've had those interviews with people, it's quite a magical moment and a horrible moment simultaneously. It's so broken, and yet it's the place of evolution. And what it is people don't remember who they were before, and they really can't go back. And so now they have to create someone new and remember who they were. And that new person is a whole new evolution. And I like that in your book, evolve is a repeated mantra, a guidance, because that really is what all of us have to do.
Oh, we just lost your sound. I don't know if something happened, which is really strange. This is good old technology.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Perfect. Now I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah, this is nothing new. Human beings suffered horrific things, all the time. Sad to say.
Yeah.
It's true.
Well, and see, Carol, this is exactly why I wanted to have this discussion with you, because I know we're on opposite ends of the country, but we are doing very, very similar work. And also, I think it is going to take, as they say, an army to, or a village, or whatever term you want to use, to help this situation. Just in our country alone, we have 21 million healthcare providers. And they estimate that around the world, now this is interesting, we have 21 million healthcare providers, and they say the rest of the world has 38 million. So United States has a whole lot of healthcare providers that are going to need a lot of help. And so, I wrote down some words as you were talking. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation is, you emphasize the fact that everyone is going to have a unique story or a unique situation. And that is something that I try to emphasize too. And in my book, I talk about, in the healer's path, I talk a lot about what I call the soul health model. And the soul health model is a holistic health model I created actually about 17 years ago now. And the reason I created this, and I'm going to hold up some images as well. When people come to me as a therapy client, they, like you said, they often come in feeling very weary and tired and broken. And so I'm a tree lover, and I use metaphors of trees all the time, which is actually laced throughout this book. But one of the things I say is that people come in feeling very, very wilty and frazzled and broken. And, anybody who knows anything about trees knows that they can be struck by lightning and they can still survive, but they're very, fragile and fragmented and fractured. And what everybody on this planet wants is to feel much more radiant and feel very rich and full and aligned and vibrant. But it is going to take a unique path for each and every one of those 21 million healthcare providers in our country and the 38 million in other countries, because everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different configuration of the branches of their tree that were already a little wilty before the pandemic, let alone what happened to break them or decimate them during the pandemic. And so my model, I talk a lot about the soul. And again, I don't use religious terms for the soul. It's all about the essence of who an individual is. It's the essence, and everybody has a different essence. And every individual needs different tools, which is another key word you brought up. And that everybody has different vulnerabilities, have different forms of, I'm just reading my list of what you wrote down, different forms of shame, different needs, and a different path of evolution. And so that's the thing, is that we need to be able to provide tools. And there's so many different tools out there, but we also need to bring them together so that those individuals can choose, wait, that's what I need, and that's what I need. And that's the beauty of, I think, bringing healthcare providers together who are trying to help healthcare providers, because many people around the country and the world have tools. We just need to figure out how to compile them so that those unique souls can bring them together. And, you mentioned the gratitude of having camaraderie. One of the stories I tell in this book that, again, it was very poignant, and it was a traveling ICU nurse. And he had told me quite a bit about what happened in his personal life because of COVID. There was a breakup in a marriage. There was all kinds of stuff that happened. Both he and his wife, I interviewed both of them, admitted COVID did this to them. COVID broke their marriage. But one of the things he said and I wrote this in the book, because one of the questions I asked them, all of the healthcare providers, is, what do you want to remember? What is it that's getting you through? What do you want to remember? And he said, for so long at the beginning of the pandemic, we could not touch even our colleagues. He said, but at a certain point, we kind of said the heck with it. And we would, at the end of our check-ins, we would do a group hug. And he said there was something about having someone's chin on my shoulder and my chin on someone else's shoulder that helped me know I was not alone, that we were in this together. We may not know each other because some of them were traveling nurses. He said, but there was something about just that shared experience that helps them through. And I again, that was such a beautiful story. And I think that's it, because when I interviewed healthcare providers, one of the main things so many of them brought up was the idea that their closest friends and closest family who did not work in healthcare did not understand what they were going through.
Right.
So just the idea that there is a shared story helps a ton. And so I think both of our approaches with our books are about creating the shared story so that they can read these books and realize, okay, this author understands me where I'm coming from. This author understands me where I'm coming from. And I just think that's a very important part of this, because with the metaphor of a tree, boy, you shake that tree, well, you need something to nourish you along the way to keep you going.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know if you have anything you want to comment with what I just said, Carol.
Well, I'm going to just take one of all those rich things that you've said, one fruit off of your tree, and the ability to communicate to the families. This is what I'm going through. This is what my day is like. So many of the healthcare workers, at least initially, were saying, I don't want to burden my family with what's really going on. I think that's a huge mistake. Secondly, I bumped into that with soldiers. I don't want my family to know what I went through on the battleground. Again, I think it's a huge mistake. And I think that's true also. I work with those that have been raped, molested. I don't want to share what I've gone with those that love me. Well, I understand that there's a time when you say this person really isn't going to understand, isn't going to really respond the way I need them to.
Right.
And isn't going to really absorb it. And maybe they're too self-centered or not experienced enough to really know how to respond. Part of my website, healthworkersupport.com, is that it's also for the families to listen to, because they're part of this equation. So when the nurses or the doctors say my family just doesn't get what I'm going through, the question is, well, then how do we communicate to the families? This is what this person's going through. It doesn't devalue you. Doesn't mean you're unimportant to who they are. You are very important. But, in understanding them, you won't take so personally the fact that you don't have the same father, or the same mother, or the same sister, or the same, etc., that you have when this sort of thing is not taking place. The families that show up and say, oh, my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, my child, they're kind of heroes, aren't they, out there in the world? Those are the families that the soldiers returned to, and they healed much better. Those are the families that the healthcare workers return to, and they heal much better on a daily basis, because there's that compassion, understanding, that empathy. And then how do you build that in a family? Because when you have a caregivers, very often, I can't tell you how often I see this, the people they've chosen as partners, and then the way they raise their kids, you know where I'm going with this, are very needy and demanding, because healthcare workers choose people that they can take care of.
Yeah.
And so now suddenly that healthcare worker needs to be able to be taken care of, but they haven't cultivated the relationship with their spouse or their children that helps that spouse and that children understand what it's like to reciprocate to someone in need that they've always relied on, who is so capable of taking their own needs. So this dynamic just kind of explodes in the face of a lot of ways of doing life that healthcare workers really can't afford to continue to do. They can't afford to be givers. It's just completely out of balance and broken.
And, Carol, I think that is such a wonderful point, because several of the healthcare workers that I interviewed, actually, they were very forthright, and I was very impressed and one of the things that I heard often from the people I interviewed was gratitude for even writing this book and interviewing them. I had so many people say, oh my gosh, this is the first time I've been able to really talk openly about this. And they could have families at home or friends at home.
Tragically.
And it was just really interesting, because so many of them just thanked me. And, like I said, I've cried with them. I cried after the meetings with them. But then several of the healthcare providers also talked about the family members who didn't want to hear what they were going through, because they were going through enough of their own stuff, or that healthcare providers felt isolated from their loved ones, their spouses, their family members, because of the fact that they were either the family members were so self-absorbed that they just couldn't hear what the healthcare providers were going through. And so many of them didn't have somewhere to go, even though, like you said, I think many of them chose not to, out of, trying to protect the other person. And so one of the things I mentioned in the interpersonal chapter of my book that talks about the interpersonal branch is the whole idea of that you need to have partners who value equality and basically are reciprocal in their care for one another. And so, that's one of those things with going through this whole health model, is I try to help people understand what a healthy branch would look like anyway, physically, psychologically, socially, interpersonally, go through each branch. Because one of the other words that I have used a lot with clients over the last 2 years is the word discernment. And I think a
Interesting.
lot of people have been forced to take a look at their lives and really look at it with discernment to say what's working and what's not working. What was working before the pandemic? What was not working before the pandemic? And where do we go from here? How do we evolve out of something that's not healthy or into something that is? And so it's been a fascinating again observation and journey for me, because I use that word a lot anyway, and I use that in my other books, Soul Health. But that is a phenomenon that I think is really happening with a lot of healthcare workers, or they're taking a look at their lives differently, and they're looking deeper, and they're realizing that they're, maybe they were going through they weren't allowing themselves to honor themselves as much as maybe they know they need to now. So this is an interesting thing, and I do think that this is
Yeah.
going to shift a lot. And just before I got on this video call with you, I was reading through. I get several newsletters a day now that have several articles about healthcare workers.
Mm.
And one of them today said that now the predictions are that 23% of healthcare workers will be leaving the field,
Right.
which we already know. I mean, we know that a lot of healthcare providers are considering leaving either their jobs and going into other healthcare jobs, or leaving the field altogether. But it is fascinating because I think there's a different inventory that is happening now, and an internal inventory about what healthcare providers need and don't need. And even though we need those healthcare providers in those fields, I also, part of me, because I look at evolution and I look into alignment, is I do wonder how many providers are going to say, wait a minute, I haven't been happy for a long time anyway. I need to align my life in a different way. So I'm wondering if you're seeing that with your, clientele as well.
That's interesting. And it's funny because here's the other side of the coin. Is I've also talked to those healthcare workers that feel more impassioned, more pertinent, more valuable, more essential to the well-being of communities and to their teams and to the country, that they feel that much more animated about how intrinsically important they are to the very fabric of existence. So I think that there's that other side, as well as those individuals say, I've just done. I think it was a real shame that there are a number of hospitals that I've put my book into the hands of every single hospitalist, nurse, doctor, janitor, security guard who's taking out the body bags by the hundreds, the people who change sheets, clean floors, just take blood, insert catheters, all of these individuals, that is really intense community of people that are coming from all sorts of angles of healthcare work in the hospital, and putting my book in the hands of each of those people, trying to do portraits of as many as I can do, trying to give this program to as many as I can, that it is not the hospitals or the administrators that are embracing the materials, but it's the people that are doing the service. And that makes me very sad, because I know those hospitals are businesses. They have to be. I don't dislike that. And I know those hospitals are scrambling to make money and pay salaries. And the difficulty of financing a hospital is huge, huger than I'm going to understand. But they're afraid of workman comp, and they're afraid of disabilities, and they're afraid of people being discontent, or they're afraid of people not showing up for their job, and at the very beginning, when they were doing things with inadequate PPEs, masks that were soiled, et cetera, it's like, we really do see that. How do we help the administrators, who probably really in secret want to be highly compassionate and supportive, feel torn that they can't provide what their very essential workers need on all sorts of different levels, because they're somehow torn. And so when you mention these people leaving the profession, to what degree are they leaving the profession that kind of dishonored them, kind of set them in a very risky position, as opposed to honored them?
And you again, another fantastic point, because in the midst of me interviewing these healthcare providers, one of the questions I asked is, what were you surprised by?
Yeah.
And I left that wide open. What were you surprised by? And several of them, immediately talked about their administrations and
Yeah.
how little they felt cared for, and what a big gap there is between, again, the business side and the clinical side. And several of them were very angry about it and very hurt by it
Right.
and fractured by it. And many of them said, it's not the job I want to leave. I love the job. I love what I do. It's where I work that I want to leave now. And so it is fascinating. And one of the things I say in the book is I hope administrators read this.
Mhm.
But you're right, it's very hard to crack the seal of getting into an administration mindset to really embrace books like this, because they're not business oriented. Like you said, they want to make the bucks, they want to make the money. I get that, it is a business.
They want and they have to.
Yes.
Yes.
And yet, I think that is, again, I'm sort of a Pollyanna about this. I think that is also one of my hopes that will come out of this eventually, is that hopefully the administrators will learn how to integrate the compassion part of this, and learn how to bring this full circle. Now, I'll say this, and I think it's a beautiful thing. There is a CEO of an alcohol and drug treatment center, a nationally known center, that contacted me a week ago Friday, and I've done some staff development work with him about 5 years ago. And the subject line said "help," and there were 2 paragraphs in the email saying, we really, we're struggling. Our staff is really falling apart because of COVID. We want to hire you, knowing what you're doing with this book right now. We want to hire you to come in and teach us as administrators and the management team how to create a better environment. And we want you to work with our staff. So there's 3 levels that I'll be working with.
Beautiful.
And it's beautiful, because I know this is like the model of what we need moving forward in administration. Now, granted, the tough thing is the larger systems are much harder to work with, because there's too many layers, there's too many people involved. So it is going to be really interesting to see how this works. But I do think, and again, I think it's another really important message to send out there, that healthcare is fractured and broken at so many levels right now because of COVID, that the work you and I are doing can be transferred to the different levels if given the opportunity. And that's the thing, is given the opportunity. I think you and I both started out trying to heal the professionals. But what I'm realizing very quickly is that there's a lot more healing that needs to take place with different levels of administration, the management teams, the new graduates, the people who are the veterans of the healthcare, field. I think there's lots of different dimensions to this that, again, I'm sort of, I call myself the pathological Pollyanna, because I'm always hopeful. I am always ready to get in there and say, let's see what we can do. Let's make this better. And, that's, I guess, why my mindset of evolution comes in handy. But I think this is it. I think there are so many different angles of healthcare that need assistance at this point and need healing. And I absolutely know that the administrators are wounded and broken in their own way. It's just that there's such a gap that the practitioners often don't see that. So it is an interesting, again, I'll go back to using the word evolution. I think this will be an interesting evolution. And if I chose to, I think the remainder of my career could be working with healthcare providers to help, the systems recover, because, this is going to be an ongoing thing for quite some time. And I want to bring this up because I know you, being an expert also in trauma work, you understand this, but I want to make sure the public understands this. One of the things I brought up to my book coach this time last year when I had that meeting with her was the whole idea that when it comes to trauma, a lot of times trauma survivors or those who experience trauma don't really want to deal with the trauma right away. They want their lives to feel packaged and put back together. And I told her it's going to be down the line that a lot of the healthcare practitioners, and in this case, a lot of the administrations and the healthcare systems, are ready to address this kind of stuff, because they're not going to be ready. Right now, they just want to feel, quote, back to normal, whatever normal is. And like you said, it will never be back to normal. They have changed, which is why their souls have, transformed in this whole thing. but I think this is it. I think it's important for viewers to understand that trauma survivors do not really want to heal right away. They want to feel like they've got some control over things. They want to feel like their lives are a little bit more aligned, which again, to me, is where, this thing can come in handy, is give them some tools, give them a path. The healer's path is all about giving them a path. But the true healing probably won't happen for a while. So I don't know if you have something you want to say about that.
It's interesting. So how do I do this? There we go.
There we go.
This is a book that I wrote. Oh, wow.
Yeah, Zoom is a little bit interesting when you have
a
a background.
vanishing book. Okay. I'm going to do this until, whoa.
We'll get it. We saw it briefly. There you go, right there. Right there.
Paths to Recovery After Abuse and Trauma. So this book was a couple of years before all of this took place. I think that when you talk about them not wanting to heal, it reminds me of a course that I developed for professionals, which was, there's like 7 stages of healing as it relates to trauma. And you have to kind of know where your patient or client is in the session on one of those 7 levels, because the patient may be ready for level 7 when they come in, and then the next time they're level 1. And so I won't talk about all the levels right now, but that's just to illustrate that I really do believe every moment is a recovery process or a renewal process or an injury process. So that every moment's organically shifting in recovery, renewal, and trauma. So I guess I don't agree with that idea that they're not ready to recover, because I think every moment is kind of like that urge to recover. And even the urge to like, let me just regroup and let me just have my previous existence, let me get some control, is a form of recovery. Mm-hmm. And I talk about that also in the website, which is one of the ways you can recover is to try to figure out how to have routine. One of the chapters in my book is go back to boring old routine, go back to cleaning your house and getting those dust bunnies out of the corner. It's like that can be very healing, because there's some in control, getting something done, paying the bills. It's mundane, it's irritating, and it's part of everyday life. And that everyday life, you're like, oh, I'm revisiting this boring moment. How nice is that? Mm-hmm. So I guess I don't think we actually really disagree on this. I'm just actually saying that I think every moment is recovery. Then every moment, regardless of where they are on those 7 steps that I have, they're in the process of trying to heal and recover and rejuvenate and regenerate. Now, they may not always want to go in there and do surgery on their wounds. Mm-hmm. And I think that's more what you're saying. They may not want to do the therapeutic surgery on their wounds and get in there and then go through the reconstructive process of trauma recovery, but I think they're on some of the paths of recovery. And can I take us through an exercise? I did this in this is so easy. I did this in one of my seminars with some healthcare workers, and it was so fun for them and so nice for them to realize that they could have a 30-second process that would make them feel renewed. And that's one of the things I have in my books. It's like, oh gosh, this book has over 300 different ways of gaining your peacefulness, your inner peace. And the idea that you can regain some inner peace in 30 seconds is, it seems ridiculous. But what helped is that it gave them the optimism. You are the queen of optimism, you're saying. It gave them the optimism that, oh, in this moment, I can have a refreshing. Mm-hmm. And if I can have collectives of these type of refreshing moments, that's so very different than feeling like I have to do deep dive surgery with myself. Right. So I think both ways are recovery. But let me just take you through. I used to call this the 3 S's. I'm going to call it the 4 S's. And here we go. The first S is to just shake. So come on, we just have to shake. We have to be really ridiculous about shaking. And this is just kind of like Qigong shaking, and you vibrate all over. And Qigong says you should do this for like 10 minutes. We just shake, 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 shake. It loosens up the muscles. It feels completely silly. And everybody in the class started laughing because and yet it is a way. So when you exit a patient's room and you just do the shakes, you go to the bathroom and do the shakes. Then after you do the shakes, then you do the sighs. You go, yeah. maybe 4
Yep.
times, maybe 10 times.
Mhm.
Oh, come on, I want to hear you do your
Well, and
sighs.
I use this too, but I call them audible sighs,
Yeah.
and because I make them use that guttural feeling or that
Yes.
guttural, oh,
Ah, yeah.
there's
So,
something
y-
energetic as far as the release goes. And
yes.
where else is it socially acceptable to make those sounds? It's
Yeah.
not.
Now, when they're
So
going to go out to their car after their thing, or when they're taking a break, the next one is scream. Ah!
I would do
That's
that,
so
but my
common.
dogs would probably come running.
I may have some people running in here and worrying about
Right,
this, but it's that scream. And I know people when they're driving their car, they just, ah,
right,
let that scream. And that is that guttural,
yeah,
letting it out, letting it scream.
right,
And that relates a lot to the angers that are related to compassion fatigue, or the anger of having to hold your tongue
the
because you're not going to
frustrations,
help the
yes,
doctor or the patient. So
yes,
as that scream. So you have the shake, you have the
right,
sigh, you have the scream, and then maybe just to be seen, just to look at yourself and see yourself. Which, when I hand portraits over to healthcare workers, I just did some this last week, and I got a call back from one of them, and he said, "Wow, I feel so seen.
mhm,
Yeah, I feel so." And what I do now is I'm doing the portraits, I'll send them snapshots of what it's like when it's just on the canvas and it looks really abstract, or what it's like when it's a little bit more developed. And there's always an ugly phase in art. So I show them
mhm,
the ugly part of the portrait, and then they begin to emerge from the canvas, and they begin to experience that sense of being seen.
yeah,
So these are the 4 S's of. And notice how do you need to shake again? These This is very quick. So I did this in 30 seconds with these group of nurses and
mhm,
doctors, and they started laughing with each other, and they started doing this in their group meetings.
right.
And they said that these 30 seconds just let them illustrate how they could release themselves to recovery and renewal and being refreshed. And that's part of the recovery process too, is finding these quick and easy tools.
Well, and also letting people be themselves. And I think, you said
Yeah.
that, you had people seeing, viewing the portraits saying, I felt seen and I felt heard. I received an email yesterday from one of the healthcare workers that I had interviewed, actually back in April. And it was a beautiful, just very heartfelt email wishing me well for today for the book launch. And he said to me, he said, back then, when you interviewed me, I felt so heard and I felt so supported and I felt
Yes.
so, and he is a leader in healthcare. And he said, leaders of departments don't get to feel heard very often. And I felt heard by you.
Very true.
And so that is one of the most important things. And, when we were talking before about the fact that some families don't want to hear, the stories, or friends don't want to hear, or if they do hear, they're kind of like, okay, that's too much for me. And so it's such an important part of the healing process to feel heard, but also, and I want to say this, to hear yourself.
Mm.
Because I think, and this is where I talk about the soul, I think so many healthcare workers, and I'm going to use the metaphor of the mask. This same healthcare worker and I joked that, the masks that we all are taught to wear as healthcare workers, a lot of times, we metaphorically wear them all the time. And when I met this person almost
Yeah.
22 years ago, I mentioned to him during the interview, well, it was actually after that when we continued to communicate, I said to him, you had no idea that at the time that I knew you back then, that I was going through one of my own dark nights of the soul. And I said, that's how well we protect ourselves. And he said, I would have had no idea.
Right.
So it's one of the things that I try to emphasize in the healer's path is to really help individuals know that they need to hear themselves as well. They need to see and hear themselves, because it's important to be recognized and heard by someone else as far as our difficulties and our pain. But when we can witness our own and also honor our own pain and difficulties and fractures, to me, that's where the first strike of healing begins. And unfortunately, healthcare workers are taught not to do that. You have to be tough. You can't show vulnerability. They don't even feel like they can go for mental health work because of the fact that, a lot of times if it shows up on their insurance or if it shows up on their licenses, every year physicians have to go through a questionnaire of whether or not they've been diagnosed with depression or anxiety. If they check yes,
Oh boy.
what is that going to mean?
Yeah.
So I think we've got lots of layers of this to break through. And that's why I say to healthcare providers or non-healthcare providers who are clients, how important it is for you to see and witness yourself.
Mhm.
Because it's, yes, I can witness it and I get gratitude every day. My last client yesterday was so gracious with the fact that she can talk with me and be with me during this process of her own healing. But it's really her own witnessing that is important, I think. Honoring and being aware that, yes, you've got someone else to listen, but it's like you're giving yourself the space. I call it soul space. You're giving yourself the soul space to do this healing work and giving themselves permission to do it, which I think is super, super important. So it's, we have so many layers, and I think you and I will be working for a long time to see what we can do. I know we only have a few more minutes. Are there one or two key points that you want to emphasize, either about the process of healing or a message you want to get out there to healthcare workers?
Well, I think I'd like to just go dive into the deep in the dirty for just a second. I mentioned this beforehand, but in my book, I added 2 chapters after the initial release. And the chapters had to do with the fatal mistake and deep grief, managing deep grief. And I decided to put up here a drawing of mine about people in deep grief because this person in the middle that my head's blocking it has died. And deep grief is a excruciatingly painful thing to go through. And they had an inordinate amount of grief every day watching these people die. Right. And not being able to save them and not having the tools to know how to save them and feeling their helplessness, which is part of grief. We're all helpless when it comes to someone dying, including our own death. So that sense of helplessness, where as opposed to they're helpful, they know what to do, they have their tools. When I work with healthcare workers, it's very much about what are the tools that I need to make this happen now, and how do I intervene often, right. Because that's what they do all day long with their people, and very helpfully. But when it comes to grief, there's not really no tools other than to have the intense experiences of it. And so in my book, I do have quite a bit dedicated, chapters 8 and 9, to what it's like to grieve and go through the grief as a healthcare worker, because that's going to be part of their healing. And so I just wanted to honor that in brief. I could go in more detail, but the second thing I wanted to say, which is even harder to say, it's even a deeper secret, is the fatal mistake. And every healthcare worker has done something that was a fatal mistake that they believe on some level was the cause of the ill health turning even worse, or of someone dying. And they hold these dark secrets, and they can't say it because of malpractice, or they can't say it because they're afraid of being chagrined or thought ill of by but every single healthcare worker has the fatal mistake, not one, many. And the fatal mistake is always learned from. It's always kind of a wake-up call. It also speaks to the extreme vulnerability of all of us for being limited and imperfect human beings. And none of us can really defeat death once death is the inevitable. And yet in the healthcare profession I should be able to defeat death. That's why I got in this profession. And so that fatal mistake is just mortifying. And when I heard I've heard it since then, this is where I will cry, is when I hear doctors and nurses committing suicide. Good doctors and good nurses and good hospitalists. And I suspect it's because of that fatal mistake, or I suspect it's because the grief was just too much. I
pressure.
Suspect it's because the defeat of death was just inevitably impossible. And so I want healthcare workers to know that not only do we want to give them the tools and have the fun and the sighs and the moments of renewal and the tools that can get them through the day, or even the catharsis of having a quality therapeutic relationship or being seen and having space for themselves, for self-care, and all those wonderful things that you really emphasize. I love the way you emphasize the self-care dimensions of everything that's related to your system in your book. And then we come to grief and the fatal mistake. And there we have an entirely different process that goes on for them.
Right.
So I wanted to see that and bring it out and let that be very real, because that's very, very hard to talk about,
Right.
for so many reasons. So,
You know,
wow,
and
you got on an upbeat moment.
well, I think this is that, there is, and that's why I talk about, the path to healing, because this is a path. And, in the very beginning of the book, chapter 1, I bring up the whole idea of the dark night of the soul, and how the dark night is, it's, this concept has been around for hundreds of years. And this has been the dark night of healthcare soul. And, this has been in our generation, like you said, 100 years ago it was there, but we are seeing it in our era. And so I bring up that whole idea of the dark night of the soul and how to evolve beyond it. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is how do you evolve beyond the grief and those fatal mistakes? And that's exactly why a lot of healthcare providers don't want to be called heroes, because on the outside, everybody's cheering them on. And on the inside, they're thinking, wait, there's nothing heroic about not feeling like I can help these people. So I flush that out in the book. And but my whole concept is not only to get through the grief and the trauma and the burnout and the compassion fatigue and all those things we're hearing in the news right now, but it's really about how to evolve beyond them. How is it that we can heal? And I say this on my website, I say this in the book, that as a therapist, for me personally, it's not enough for me to help people heal. I want to help people evolve beyond where they were, because, like you said, individually, they are not only grieving their capabilities and these really horrendous situations and deaths that they've witnessed, they're also grieving a part of themselves. And so to me, soul health is all about grieving what you thought you were, grasping a whole new paradigm, which is really why I wanted to give people this whole idea of the soul health model, so that they can get to a brighter day, get to a brighter beyond, because it's that dark night that we're supposed to evolve beyond. And that's why I say I think, and I agree with you actually with I do think healing is in every moment. And what I meant is many times people don't want to revisit the intense fractures. They don't want to go back to the traumatic event itself. Yeah, they will heal around it until they're ready to peel back enough layers to heal that. But I think this is it. This is a process. One of the things I say in the book, I say this with clients, I say this on videos, is that evolution doesn't happen at the pace that we'd like it to, and it never happens in a straight line. So when we evolve, it is an individual process, and sometimes we've got to do this, and sometimes we go around it for a while. But my whole point is, and this is exactly why I had the book designer create this whole very bright background, is that whether healthcare providers believe it or not, there is brightness beyond this. There is something beyond all of this. There's something, and to me, it's the evolutionary part of being able to see where they came from and move beyond it, and then be able to look back and go, oh, yeah, that's who I was, but this is me now, and this is how I can be better and can really take what I've experienced and take it somewhere. And again, this is the very positive, optimistic part of me. But I do believe people can get there, and that is the whole point with this book, is we just need the tools to do it. And I don't think healthcare providers have often been given those tools. So it's a beautiful thing to have other healthcare providers across the country doing what you're doing. I'm very glad to have pulled together with you, and I know that we will continue to work together to make some of this happen. Do you want to give them your websites and contact information, and then I will give mine as well?
Okay, I will do that. But first, this is from your book, chapter 17, The Golden Path. Walk on your yellow brick road. If you can't find one, spray paint your way into happiness. If that doesn't work, buy yellow shoes. And I know that is a quote from Hamden, but it is truly indicative of what your book offers.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that's what my book is attempting to offer as well. Website, healthworkersupport.com, healthworkersupport.com. Please go there. You can contact me through that, but please go there. It's all free and set up for health workers and administrators and people who are running groups on floors so that they can use this as a bouncing off place to talk. It's there for meditation, for ease of your soul and working through really intense situations, and even some yoga. And I'm going to get a Qigong specialist to come and do some Qigong stress release work on it as well. And I'm hoping you will offer a class on
Absolutely.
healthworkersupport.com as well.
Absolutely.
I'll probably put this video on there. Secondly, you can contact me through drkarolfrancis.com. That's just my name, drkarolfrancis.com. And 310-543-1824 is my phone number. They are welcome to ask for a free book. I will send it to them. I will send hundreds of them to their hospital. I've been doing that now. I think the printers all over this country know the book and know they're going to be sending it to bizarre and wonderful places. And then also if you'd like to have a portrait so you feel really seen. And also, if you have a spouse or a partner in your life that is a healthcare worker, you'd like to honor them with a portrait surprise. That's been really touching, because then that health worker says, wow, my spouse asked this on my behalf. And that's been a gift as well. And again, while that's a tremendous amount of time spent on my behalf of people, it's just so important that we see these wonderful souls.
Absolutely.
So that they can stay there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I know that we'll stay on for a few more minutes, but thank you so much for being here. Like I said, I know that we are going to continue working together and seeing what we can do to, help bring some light to the world for healthcare workers. So I appreciate you being here today.
And what's your contact information?
Yeah, and so for me, so I'm going to throw this out there. So for those of you, this is 2/22/22. The reason that I chose this date is basically because in the spiritual world, 2/22/22 is a very auspicious, powerful time of new beginnings. And I thought it was perfect timing to get this book out there. The energies are very intense right now as far as transformation and working through things. And so it just felt very perfect. And my assistant is putting the information for my book website on the screen right now. So I'm going to say it in just a minute. But so 2/22/22, this is really important. If you are ready to buy the book and buy it today, there are several different bonuses that you get. So you can go to either Amazon.com and just type in The Healer's Path to Post-COVID Recovery, or you can go to www.thehealerspathbooks.com and you will read a little bit more about me. You'll read about the book, and there's also a link right on there to go straight to the Amazon page. And you can contact me through that page, or you can also go to my own webpage, which it's a little bit long. It's www.Dr.KatherineT.Kelly.com. You have to put the T in there because there's an orthodontist in Minnesota by the name of Katherine Kelly. So www.Dr.KatherineT.Kelly.com. And you will find out about the clinical services, a lot of the soul services I do. There's book information on there. If you are a healthcare administrator and you would like to work with me, I'm already getting calls to work with healthcare administrators and also healthcare systems. So trying to get a little bit more of a wellness approach and a holistic approach coming back into the healthcare system, which I think is very much going to be needed in the future. But if you do decide to purchase the book today, you will be, and what you will need to do is send proof of the purchase, just a screenshot or a photo shot, to evolve@drkatherine.T.Kelly.com. If you send it there, then you will receive basically 25% off of, I also haven't mentioned this on this video, I also have an essential oils company that is called Soul Health Essentials. And it's I have an entire healthcare line of there's several oils just specifically designed for healthcare practitioners. And in fact, Carol has some of those that she's been giving out. But one is called the Healer's Healer, and it's especially blended basically to help healers go through things like this. And so again, it's www.soulhealthessentials.com. So one of the things that you will receive is a 25% off coupon, or basically a coupon code for any of the oils on that page, regardless if they are the healthcare oils. I have 8 different lines of of oils, so have fun because it's a big web page. You will also get a downloadable copy of a companion guide to what is called the Recipe for Radiance, which is my second book. And what that is it's a little workbook about how to create your self-care plan. So again, I think healthcare providers struggle with knowing where to start with self-care. You also have free access to a webinar I'll be doing in a few weeks. And then also, which is really fun, I'm giving away a couple different sets of the starter kits for the healthcare provider line oils. And there's 3 roller balls in those. So it's kind of fun because I get to kind of really throw out a lot of help and hope that people, really make use of it. So if you order that today, just send that to the evolve at Dr.KatherineT.Kelly.com. I'll put you on the list. You'll get an email and get all that information for you. So, but yeah, lots of options. I'm also going to be doing some online classes. I'm going to be doing some retreats and things for healthcare providers. There's a lot coming up, so stay tuned. Also, if you'd like to add yourself to my email list, you can do that on the www.DrKatherineT.Kelly.com website, or just go ahead and send an email to the evolve at Dr.KatherineT.Kelly.com. That website's actually going to be changing in a few months. We are updating that website, but you will still have access to that. So, all right, we said a lot in a little over an hour. So, Carol, it was wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for including me in your very exciting day. And it's wonderful that so many people are going to get a hold of your book and feel their space to be able to move on in life.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting. Caitlin, my assistant, texted me while we were on, showing me that there was another #1 category.
Oh my gosh! So way to go!
It's surreal and overwhelming and beautiful. So hopefully it's getting into the right hands.
Wow, and, that's fantastic.
Yeah, she's kept up with it, and it's I have screenshots of all of it to make proof that this is going where it's supposed to go. So contact either one of us. I have a feeling Carol and I will be working together. You'll probably see more videos of us. And so if anything triggers you and you have a question, feel free to put a message on the Facebook page or anywhere else. And I'm sure one of us will answer that for you. So
very cool.
Thank you very much. I hope you have
a wonderful
rest of your day. And I'm sure we will be in
tally-ho through this day. It's going to be like the end of it, you're going to go, what just happened to me?
Well, it's also, and I know I said this right before, and for those viewers out there, it's also National Margarita Day. So probably at the end of the day.
Wow.
I have 2 more videos I'm doing this afternoon.
Salute.
Yes, I will have a little cheers. So, nice. All right, you take good care, and I will be back. We will be back soon. I will be on at 5:30 this evening, and we'll go from there. Thanks. Bye.